Chapter 6. Death and Resurrection.
Deliver those who are drawn toward death, and hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. Proverbs 24, verse 11.
Now I know, I began to think to myself after the first 3 sailings. I have served my apprenticeship. It gave me security. Shipping had been new to me, but now I felt more confident. Later in the year, I had a prompting in my spirit that it was time to renew the sailings on a regular basis. I had a sense that we should go with a vessel from a Russian company. The Black Sea Shipping Company, Blasco, was at the time the biggest, I believe, in the world. They had 250 vessels. But when I told a shipping man that I wanted to charter with Blasco, he dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Blasco sends no ships to Israeli waters," he said. "Even tourists must change ships in Cyprus." The president of the Black Sea Shipping Company, I learned, had no love for God's chosen people. He supported the former Soviet policy of boycotting the Jewish state. So I went before the God of Israel and poured my heart out. I told him, "This is not right." And the Lord brought to my mind a word which King David pronounced many years ago over one of his enemies. "Let his days be few, and let another take his office." Psalm 109, verse 8. This was indeed a good word. I went to the office of my shipping agent in Odessa. "I want to send a telex to my office in England," I told him, and sat at his desk and wrote, "Let Christians around the world join me in prayer that Psalm 109 verse 8 will apply to the president of Blasco, and he will be removed." I pushed this across the desk to the shipping agent, a young, smartly dressed Ukrainian professional. He looked at it and was astounded. "Are you sure?" he asked. "It is not wise what you are doing." I understood him. There is never a sense of complete freedom in the former Soviet Union. People watch their speech far more carefully than we in the West. Sometimes associates would ask me to walk with them outside to discuss confidential matters. And the president of Blasco was a powerful man in Ukraine. "I am sure," I said, nonetheless. I felt the Lord had given the release to do it. 3 days later, Elsa and I were packing our suitcase at the hotel when I heard a knock on our door. I opened it to find the shipping agent. He looked at me and said, "What kind of a man are you?" "Why? What has happened?" "This morning the news came on the radio. The president of the Black Sea Shipping Company is under investigation for corruption." The president was removed. His replacement was willing to work with us. We serve a great God. Next came the challenge of finding a partner to handle the operation in Israel. I had quite hard discussions about this in January 1993 with shipping company owner Moshe Mano. We were miles apart following one long night in a lawyer's office in Tel Aviv. Moshe arrived to drive me to the central bus station so I could catch the midnight bus back to Jerusalem. He lost his way and at some traffic lights rolled down his window to ask directions from the next car. But instead he got excited, parked the car and jumped out. He talked very intently with the other driver for several minutes as I sat looking at my watch. I got a bit irritated, thinking I would miss the last bus. Finally, he came back to the car. "I've been trying to reach that man for several days," he told me. "His only son Ronan was shot in Hebron a month ago while on guard duty. There's a bullet still lodged in his brain." Moshe paused and looked over at me. "You know, money is not that important," he said. "Life is important." We both knew that night there'd be no problem reaching an agreement, and in fact together we chartered the 500-bed Blasco passenger ship Dmitry Shostakovich for 25 weekly sailings between April and September 1993. It was a beautiful ship, built in 1980 at the Gdansk shipyard, where Lech Walesa, President of Poland, from 1990 to 1995, worked as an electrician. After long negotiations, we also leased a former communist youth camp in Odessa to house and feed the Olim for several days before each sailing. Elsa and I moved in to coordinate the operation in mid-March while the grounds were still covered with snow. Volunteers began streaming in from many nations to serve with us. At first we found the camp was a dark place. Strange characters went in and out of the hotel. We heard dogs barking all night and saw them limping about in the day as if they'd been beaten. The weather was freezing, and the heating and hot water were often out of order. Most of the toilet seats were missing from the bathrooms. The food was awful, and unless a translator was with us, the language barrier left us helpless. The staff looked at us with cold suspicion. "There's not much willingness to please," Elsa commented to me after a few days. "It's more like negotiating our rights." I had to agree. The staff carried out their duties with empty, hard expressions, projecting their own difficult past. I did meet some Ukrainians during this time who went out of their way to be helpful, but that was certainly the rare exception and not the rule. When I looked into the eyes of the former Soviet people, I could hardly ever detect a sparkle, and I couldn't help thinking how much they needed Jesus. We found everything was an effort in the post-communist Ukraine. Technologically, they were 50 years behind the West. It was easier to drive across town to someone than to reach them by phone. One morning, I needed to make photocopies. There were 2 shops in town. I went to the first and found it had no electricity. I crossed town to the second and found it had no paper. I took a translator with me and went down to the port. I knew we'd have to come to some terms with the Ukrainian customs officials if we were to avoid the scenes of the earlier sailings. We faced 12 customs and immigration officials across a long table in a frigid room. I was a bit naive. "We believe that we will carry as many as 8,000 immigrants on these sailings," I told them. "I've come to see what your requirements are." There were no smiles. The temperature visibly dropped. "We are not equipped for immigration," the head official replied grimly. "If you want us to be, you must provide." They pulled out lists of demands that I estimated would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars: X-ray equipment, computers, and building a storage room. I declined our lawyer's offer to write to the Ukrainian president about the customs impasse. Instead, I turned to the Lord. And after many battles and negotiations to the early hours, we came to terms. Together with our Israeli shipping agent, we did indeed agree to purchase X-ray equipment, which would allow customs to process the olim without the painstaking opening of every bag. The new procedures would cut a family's waiting time with their possessions from days to 3 or 4 hours. But even as one problem was sorted out, another came. No ship insurance was in place. No approval had come from the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. No wood could be found to crate the baggage. The equipment we had promised the customs officials didn't arrive. Word came from the Absorption Ministry in Israel that the first sailing date was unacceptable, as the ship would arrive just before the start of Passover, when the Torah allows no work. "If it's late, we'll leave it at sea with no provisions," they warned. To top it all, there was no fuel in the port for the sailing. And then we found that the optimistic reports of the Ukrainian Jewish group responsible for recruiting olim were illusory. Only 43 were booked for the first sailing. It seemed all hell had been turned loose against this shipping line. Faith levels began to drop, and a few volunteers began to lose heart and question our mission. I felt that a strong word was needed to silence dissent. The night before we were due to board ship, I called the team together. "We're going to load up with luggage tonight, take it to the port and put it on the ship," I told them. "And it's going to sail because God said it's going to sail." The next day, even as Elsa and I were going up the ramp with the last of the olim, a barge came up and filled the ship with fuel. On board we found a group of our intercessors. They had stood by us unshaken through this time, disregarding what they were seeing and hearing. I sat across from them at the table but couldn't speak. I just wept with relief. It had a tremendous effect on us all. We embraced, and Elsa and I walked down the ramp into the gathering darkness. The second sailing was only a week away, and we were dismayed to learn that there were even fewer olim registered than for the first. They had flocked to our trial sailings from all over the Soviet Union a year before. Many had been waiting years for the opportunity. But the torrent of Aliyah had now dwindled to a steady stream of just 1/3 of the previous year's peak. There were also new border and customs controls which restricted Olim and their belongings from entering Ukraine from other republics, and the Jewish agency had put in place its own structure of direct flights. Instead of more bookings, we got cancellations. We saw that we must develop our own booking network. But as we began to contact the Jewish community, they were slow to respond and were reluctant to display our information. Many of the Jewish people of Ukraine still bore open wounds from their terrible suffering at the hands of Gentiles during the Holocaust. During our first visit to Kiev, the capital, Elsa and I had visited the grassy park on the outskirts of the city called Babi Yar. A guide told us its story. When the German army came into Kiev in 1941, they announced to all the Jews, "Get your belongings ready, you are being resettled." They were gathered in a huge crowd at Babi Yar. Each family left its money at a table. Their belongings were laid down in a pile. Then they were told to undress and were driven in groups of 100 to the edge of a great ravine. A woman who gave birth at the site went with her newborn baby in her arms. As they approached the ravine, the realization came over them that there would be no resettlement. They were mowed down by machine gun fire. Over 33,000 people died that day. Many were only injured and buried while still alive. Our guide told us that the earth was moving for days after the massacre. Elsa and I were devastated. We walked silently back to the car. Neither of us could say anything. We'd heard about this before, but somehow when we really saw with our own eyes, to know it happened here, we faced the evil and cruelty of mankind. It was a shock for us to accept coming from our sheltered background. Later, Elsa and I went to an uncultivated field near the port in Odessa. It seemed no one wanted to build on it. A modest memorial stone explained why. In October 1941, 6 days after German and Romanian troops had occupied Odessa, an explosion blew up the Romanian command headquarters and killed the commanding general. As retribution, 19,000 Jews were assembled in a fenced-off area, sprayed with petrol and burned alive. The next day, 16,000 more were marched in long columns to a nearby village. First they were machine-gunned in groups of 50, and then, to save time, locked in warehouses, which were then set ablaze. Panicked mothers attempting to throw their children from the windows were met with grenades and bullets. "Where were you Christians when all this happened?" one Jewish leader asked when we said we'd come to help them go home. "Nobody came in our time of need." Opposition from a source I'd never expected compounded this initial suspicion and mistrust. Instructions came to Jewish agency field workers from headquarters in Jerusalem to steer Olim away from our sailings. Families were warned that if they arrived in Haifa port with their belongings, they would be stranded at the dock with no one to help them. Finally, advertisements appeared in the Ukrainian newspapers featuring a picture of a ship with a big red X over it. Underneath was the headline, "The sailings from Odessa to Haifa are not taking place." It was signed by the Jewish agency. I was shattered. I knew when I was going into the former Soviet Union, I would have a battle on my hands. I didn't expect it with the Jews or within Israel. But then the Lord graciously reminded me that Moses had his hands full, not only with the Egyptians, but also with his own people. Nothing had changed. Initially, agency officials had grave reservations that we Christians would have the ability to do this work. They feared we might disappear after a few months, leaving them to take over our responsibilities. Somehow it seemed they also saw our help as competition in a sphere which had until then been exclusively theirs. We hit the low point on the 5th weekly sailing that left Odessa on Good Friday at the end of April. 320 beds were paid for, but only 10 Olim were on the ship. I came under severe attack. By now half our volunteers had left or been dismissed. Some men who would work with us called a public meeting in London to ask me to justify why we were spending so much money for so few people. They doubted the vision and felt that I was unwise to charter such a big ship for weekly sailings. I felt humiliated by the call for a public meeting. I asked myself where it would lead. Would I be exposed as one who had acted out of the flesh? Had I really heard the Lord? I felt that I had failed, and for the first time began to think of giving up. In the middle of the night, I got out of bed in our room at the Odessa camp and lay on my stomach, nose down on the carpet, weeping. I can't take it any more, I cried out to the Lord. A breaking up was going on, a breaking of my pride that I was the one chosen to do this work. It was painful, humbling. I climbed back into bed, sobs still racking my body as I lay next to Elsa. She was awake and spoke to me in the darkened room. I want to tell you a story. There was a man who built the best ship ever. It took him 120 years, and there were only 8 people on it. I realized she was talking about Noah. It was an amazing revelation. It gave me courage. Elsa was marvelous. She never doubted one moment that the Lord had called us. A few days later, we flew to Jerusalem. The Jewish agency now made an offer to pay us $180 for each immigrant we brought on our sailings. I was at first overjoyed and thought this might be our answer. Lord, what are you saying? I asked. Do we accept or not? Do we continue with the sailings or not? Our team in Odessa came out against accepting the offer, but I still took over a week to consider. It offered a way of escape from the rising criticism. But finally the Lord did not allow me to accept. He reminded me that he has called the Gentiles to carry his sons and daughters back home. The public meeting was held on Tisha B'Av, the day of disasters on the Jewish calendar. It was on this day Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BC, and the Second Temple by the Romans. With very mixed emotions of pain, indignation, and apprehension, I flew to London with Elsa. We walked into the meeting room in a hotel near Heathrow Airport and found about 50 people there. Several of our faithful intercessors were on hand just to pray. I took a seat at a table at the front with Johannes Fakius and Kiel Skjorberg. I saw other leaders of the Intercessory Prayer Conference who had flown in, Eliyahu Ben Haim from Israel and Robert Vara from Switzerland. Kingsley Priddy had come in from the Bible College of Wales. These men all knew me intimately and had been standing with us in prayer. All were recognised Christian leaders. Even the dissenters respected and accepted them. The meeting was quite tense at the beginning. Johannes emerged as the chairman and together with Kiel diffused the situation. They handled the discussion in the spirit and with a sensitive listening ear. All had the opportunity to speak from the heart. No one was steamrolled. A few argued that we were wasting God's resources. I was astounded when the leaders completely dismissed the financial issue. The number of olim is not the issue, Johannes said. We must look at the wider spiritual dimension. It became clear that the united opinion of the leadership was that the call we had was from the Lord, and it was his will for the sailings to proceed. The leaders affirmed their willingness to share in the responsibility, and from this the Ebenezer Emergency Fund gained its International Advisory Board. Not all in the end rejoiced, but there was a sense of peace. We stayed for a meal afterwards with friends. Am I glad this is over? I sighed to Elsa. Only then I started to realise all of this had been from the Lord. It had been one of the most painful episodes of my life, but I saw God meant it for good. I no longer felt so important. This was really God's work, and I was just one of his servants. He is in the business of making us into men and women he can use. As Elsa often reminded me, it's not what we do for the Lord which really counts, but what he is doing in us. Now, for the first time, I grasped that our prayer and action counted beyond the boundaries of Ebenezer's own operation. I wrote to our supporters. Out of these past 3 months, the Lord has moved mightily in the heavenlies, laying the foundations of a work far greater than any one of us can visualize. The Lord has shown us so clearly the intercessory nature of the project, that we do not just have the privilege of bringing out thousands of olim, but through overcoming at every level, every opposition that hell can bring against the work, the Holy Spirit would gain a position of intercessions for Jews worldwide to be brought home to Israel, according to God's word. Kingsley's experience with intercession helped bring this into focus for us. He was always keenly interested in our work, and in a remarkable letter helped me also to see why I'd been led by the Holy Spirit to decline the underwriting of the Jewish agency for Operation Exodus. The true intercessor, he wrote, becomes personally responsible for the object of his prayer. You see, intercession is not prayer, nor even very intense prayer. Anyone may pray, and pray earnestly for something, and yet not be committed to be irrevocably responsible at any cost for its fulfillment. The intercessor is. In intercession, there is identification with the matter or persons interceded for. The intercessor is willing to take the place of the one prayed for, to let their need become his need, to let their need be met at his expense, and to let their suffering become the travail of his own heart. That is how the Lord Jesus made intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah 53:12. He was numbered with the transgressors, and he was wounded for their transgressions. Isaiah 53 verse 5. He had to be identified with sinners. He secured their pardon by vicariously paying the debt that they owed. To our surprise, the leading Israeli newspaper, Yediot Aharonot, had picked up on the crisis in Odessa. They sent a journalist to investigate, and the same week as the Heathrow meeting published a multi-page spread in their weekend edition exposing what they called the Jewish agency's efforts to torpedo the sailings. It was taken up in the Knesset. I was called to testify before a special session of the Immigration Committee. I came over from Odessa on a sailing the night before. I was sweating. To go to Parliament. Somehow I was unable to prepare what to say. That morning I entered the crowded meeting room and saw a high-powered team from the Jewish agency, members of the Knesset, government officials and the news media. As the meeting began, Yasha Kedmi, who had years of experience with Soviet Jewry as head of the Prime Minister's Liaison Bureau, came out strongly behind us. He argued that the decision of many Olim to come to Israel hinged on whether they could bring their possessions with them, which our sailings allowed. He also revealed that since 1989, his bureau had been calling for the opening of sea routes in case of emergencies when flights might be impossible. I listened to a whispered translation of his comments from Hebrew. This group wants to finance the attempt of the State of Israel and of the Jewish people to bring Olim by way of the sea. So why not agree and tell them? Thank you. I had given the committee members a paper listing some of the biblical references undergirding our work. Knesset member Avraham Ravitz, an Orthodox rabbi with full beard and black clothing, interrupted the meeting to ask for a Hebrew Bible, then turned and addressed me for the first time. In your paper, you brought a quotation from Jeremiah 16, which is a correct and lovely verse. I want to direct our attention to what is said at the end of the chapter.
O Lord, my strength and my fortress, my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles shall come to you from the ends of the earth and say, surely our fathers have inherited lies, worthlessness and unprofitable things. Will a man make gods for himself, which are not gods? Jeremiah 16, verses 19 to 20.
I will tell you why I raised these verses. On the sailing 2 years ago, and I don't know if this was your organisation, matters were not so smooth from the standpoint of the Christian group's attempt to influence the Olim. I'm speaking with you in the most open manner, as one religious man to another. Truly, Jews should be brought to Israel at any price, but not at the price of an attempt to influence them to receive a different religion. I do not agree to this price. We must remember we are dealing with Olim, who were cut off from the religion of their fathers for 73 years, and they are coming here to return to their roots. And doi vai voi, to us, if they will be influenced by a group of missionaries on their way to the country, we need to strictly guard the Jews making their way to the Holy Land, to the land of their fathers and to the religion of their fathers, to the land of the Tanakh, which is promised to them by the Holy One, blessed be He, so they will not be confused. I knew I had to speak up. Mr. Chairman, I am surprised to find myself in the Knesset. I'm a simple guy who serves an extraordinary God, and I know that the God of Israel called me to serve and to carry home the children of Israel, the chosen people. I want to say in the clearest possible way that my hands are clean and my motives are pure. All of the volunteers working with us pledge that they have no missionary intentions and they will not engage in missionary activity. At this point, I also pulled out my Bible. Listen, this book is written by you. If you read your own Bible, it says in Isaiah that the Gentiles should carry your sons and daughters back. I want you to know that all over the world there are Christians who have committed themselves to bringing the Jewish people home. During the last 2.5 years, I spent more time in Odessa than any other place, and I have travelled extensively throughout the former Soviet Union, and I understand that the situation is deteriorating. We are living on borrowed time. We need to do all that we can to bring these Olim home as quickly as possible. I think it is very important that there will be an additional escape route beyond what is now established. In chapter 60, verse 9 of Isaiah, it says explicitly that they will come home by ship, that the ships of Tarshish will bring your sons from afar. Rabbi Ravitz was following along in his Hebrew Bible. And it is also written there, he interjected, that their silver and their property is with them. That is to say, their baggage is with them. Isn't that what we've been talking about here? From that point, he and the rest of the committee were behind us, and without my speaking a word about the Jewish agency, that which was covered was revealed, and the hidden things made known. The agency was wrong all the way, Yuri Gordon, head of its immigration department, told the committee. He showed them telegrams sent to agency representatives instructing them to begin helping us. We call on the Jewish agency to settle this matter at the earliest possible time, concluded the chairman, Emanuel Zisman, at the end of the hearing. We recommend that this be given the highest priority, because you see this involves a real danger of loss of life. Afterwards, the rabbi came and shook hands with me and said, "Now I feel more comfortable about your helping our people to come home." He said I had spoken well. Not me. The Lord had taken me by his hand. Uri Gordon wrote us that week to extend our appreciation to your sponsors. You are part of a great historic event, the ingathering of the Jewish people to their land. At the Odessa base, a new atmosphere was blooming. We rebuilt our team of volunteers, drawing on some 20 nations, and there was real joy among them. They were united in their love for the Lord and His Word. Even after tiring hard work, they could sing and dance to Him. The Olim could see them shining with the love of the Lord. A German couple, Hinrich and Elke, took over the leadership of the team and brought strength and commitment. Hinrich had been managing the construction of a huge power plant when he applied to join us months earlier. Our invitation arrived the day he finished the project. He immediately took leave of absence to join us. At the camp, he recounted for us a conversation with his employer at the celebration of the plant's completion. "Why are you going to help the Jews?" he asked Hinrich. "We know that young girls are romantic and old ladies pray, but why you?" "God said to Abraham, 'I will bless those who bless you,'" Hinrich replied. "I'm not afraid to ruin my career. You'll promote me while I'm away." His boss recalled that remark when he phoned Hinrich months later in Odessa with news of promotion. Hinrich's father was an officer in the German army fighting in the Soviet Union until he was severely wounded a second time in the Ukraine in 1943. He knew about the Jews being massacred and told Hinrich about the inner turmoil between his conscience and his oath of allegiance. He very deeply embedded in Hinrich's heart that the Holocaust must not happen again. As we met with the Olim in the camp's dining hall for a farewell evening before each sailing, Hinrich read to them the prophecy of Isaiah 60, verse 14. Also the sons of those who afflicted you shall come bowing to you. And we really embraced the Ukrainians on the camp staff, treating them as human beings with a smile. It was new for them. Under the communist system they had worked under fear and the pressure of the boss. Now for the first time each was respected as a person. Gradually we broke the spirit of the camp. A big babushka, grandmother, in the kitchen insisted on kissing me whenever she saw me. We had an evening together with the scarf and gave them Russian Bibles and children's Bibles. Most took the children's Bibles, which were illustrated and easier to understand. Look, this is a book written thousands of years ago, I told them. We live in a time when what is written by these men of old, these prophets, is taking place. You are a privileged person to have a part in this. One grey-haired man on the staff always looked drunk. He came to me the day after our meeting. I couldn't drink last night, he said through a translator. I was reading the Bible the whole time. When we gave them the Bible, they treated it with far greater respect than in the West. This had been a forbidden book for 70 years. They realised we were putting something very special into their hands. Then came perhaps the most amazing development of all. Israel's only television channel had sent a crew to Odessa to prepare a documentary on our work. The night that the stunning news first broke of the Rabin Arafat Accord, all Israel gathered before the television screen for the details. Then the newscaster said, "We have one more report that belongs perhaps to a different rhythm, that of God, but it too has good news and hope for the future." With that, the programme switched to strains of our volunteers singing "He Has Made Me Glad" in the Odessa camp. There followed a remarkable 14 minutes guiding the Israeli people through our whole operation, from picking up Olim at the railway station to bringing them to the port of Haifa. There were interviews with several volunteers, but the focus of the programme was on action more than words. Before the eyes of the nation passed scenes of service and love. Volunteers from all the earth carrying the immigrants' baggage, dancing with their children, waving and singing farewell at dockside. Lingering close-up searched the volunteers' faces. One could almost hear the questions being asked. Who are these people? Why are they doing this for us? From the seeming death of the Good Friday sailing, the Holy Spirit had brought resurrection. Operation Exodus had shown the entire nation God's love and faithfulness to his word. During these weeks, the number of Olim on each sailing had been steadily rising. The name of Ebenezer was becoming well known, and the Jewish community started to accept and trust us. For the 25th and final sailing of the year, our volunteers picked up 22 different groups of Olim at the train station, plus others brought in by bus from outlying villages. The camp was fully booked and we were forced to open a second. We faced a new and welcome crisis. Would we have enough beds on board ship? In the end, all were able to embark. Some volunteers slept on cabin floors. "Tonight my heart is full of thanks," I told them after Elsa and I boarded. "God has answered my prayers." As we were going under the bridges of Istanbul, I was standing near a handicapped immigrant who was using a pair of binoculars. "May I borrow those for a moment?" I asked him. I wanted to study the old stone fortresses on the shore. He handed them to me, but when I went to return them, he refused. No, they are yours," he told me. "I want you to keep them. You have done so much for my people." I was deeply moved. They were probably his most prized possession. The evening before docking in Haifa, we savoured more of the sweet aroma of reconciliation as we shared an evening with the Olim. How they cheered when I told them the story of the removal of the Blasco president earlier that year. "We are so used to that attitude," one woman explained. "Someone not liking us simply because we are Jews." They were amazed to think that God would intervene in response to prayer. I just want to praise the God of Israel for all his help, I told them. You need to learn to pray yourselves in Israel, and God will help you with your problems. The love of God filled the room like a cloud as our volunteers came and shared their hearts with the Olim. Afterwards, I saw an American named Becky exchanging tears and hugs with a greying, bent immigrant called Rebecca. We're working together as one, Rebecca told us. I've never felt such personal attention and love. An older man who looked like a former officer in the Red Army came to me, shook my hand and said, "Once I was a communist, but now I believe in God, seeing the love shown to us by your people." Also with us was Joseph, a Holocaust survivor. We invited him and other survivors to travel on the ship for a once-in-a-lifetime tour of Israel, even though they did not plan to immigrate. "We are very surprised and totally amazed," he said after the meeting. "We were really crying. We couldn't believe it was true." He shared with us his story from the war years. My family and I, together with all the Jews, were gathered by the Germans. With my mother and sister, my grandfather and brother, we walked 35 kilometers to a camp. It was very cold. Many died on the way. The camp was called the Place of Death. Those who entered it didn't leave. We lived in terrible conditions. My mother and sister died there. Before the war, we had a Russian woman living and working in our home. She did the best she could for us. She followed us to the camp. She tried to pass food to us. After the camp was liberated by the Russian army, she took my older brother and me and helped us to find our father. She was a real Christian, the most precious person I've met in my life. She took the role of saviour in our family. We couldn't have survived without her. For Elsa and me, it was like a ray of sunshine to hear from time to time of these Christians who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Such help was forbidden by the German occupying forces on pain of death. We remembered others. The Jews called them righteous Gentiles, like Corrie ten Boom, whose family hid Jews in their home in occupied Holland. When arrested, she and her sister were taken in a cattle car together with Jews to a concentration camp. Only Corrie survived. These were true intercessors, standing with the Jews even to the point of death. The director of the Department for the Righteous at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial and Museum in Jerusalem, Dr. Mordecai Paldiel, reported that a majority of the hundreds of rescuers he studied were motivated by their Christian faith. The church as an institution came out of the Holocaust besmirched, in his view, by its failure to take a stand. But the small persons had a better grasp of what Christianity was than the hierarchy, he said. As a religion of faith, love and brotherhood, Christianity has shown itself capable of being a very potent force. The Sermon on the Mount, the Good Samaritan, they were moved by it. It speaks in favour of the teachings of Christianity.